So the first thing to say is there will be no changes to that service this year. We are not changing anything in that service this year. However, I would like to start a conversation with you about, is there an opportunity to do things better? And I see tonight as the first in those conversations. So the true count, if you like, of children, young people that we think may have ASD or ADHD is variable. So depending on what research you read, it will tell you a different number or a different percentage of the population will or won't have ASD and or ADHD. What we know in Kingston is that our referral rate to the neurodevelopmental service has increased significantly over last year and the year before that. Last year the change was 35%, so we had 35% more referrals than we did the previous year. In terms of the reasons for referrals, about 50% are referred for just an ASD assessment, about 30% it would be an ADHD and an ASD assessment, and about 20% of referrals are for ADHD assessments. We also know in Kingston schools we have a very high proportion of children with additional needs that are associated with the symptoms of ASD. And we know that that's much higher than the national average. So we are asking questions locally about why that might be. My own personal view is there is no single answer to that. It will be a number of stars aligning in the universe in a certain way that has brought us to these types of numbers that I'm sharing with you.
Do you think the 46% is there because people in this area are more aware and more well read, and more finding out more because this area is, say, more affluent than maybe another, to put it bluntly, than an area in another part of the country?
So I think it will be a number of things. So I think it will be that we are very good at identifying children early and referring them in. I think there will be a demographic element to our activity. We know that Kingston is an importer, so we attract families to Kingston because of the good services. We describe that as importing. There are some boroughs that are exporters, so they send them out to great places like Kingston. There are a number of things, and the last thing I would say is I think our knowledge of ASD and ADHD is getting better and better all the time, which helps us to make more informed kind of opinions and views about what is and isn't going on. So mental health in children and young people is quite a new area compared to adult mental health, where we have seen years and decades and years of research into adult mental health, but not as much in children and young people. So we are getting better, but it is evolving and changing all the time as our knowledge base increases.
Because of the change in having the SPA, and having people able to request through SPA a referral, albeit it takes a long time to get there, to the new neurodevelopmental centre. I'm wondering because you weren't here at the beginning of my talk, but I was saying in the olden days, which is only not that long ago, in the last 10 years or so, you used to have to try to get into tier 3 CAMS, and that was a really difficult place to penetrate. Whereas I wonder whether, perhaps it's the accessibility that's kind of led to that, and also the SEN reforms were so well publicised in this area, and there was so much flag waving around them, but I think it caused everyone to feel that they had special educational needs and wanted to get an education, health and care plan, because they just didn't want to miss out, I think. So I wonder if it was kind of those two factors that made it a bit of a difference as well.
And I agree, it would
just
be
in the last
elements of those. So I think what the SPA has enabled us to do is count better, so we know more accurately who is coming through the system, who is being referred, who is being signposted somewhere else. So I think the numbers have gone up to some extent artificially just because we're counting better. and I think some were counted another way.
Can I just ask what the average age is that you're identifying here with these figures? Is there a sort of average?
So the age range of these figures, and I'll come back to that last point, it's a number of things.
I was just wondering.
Yeah, it is a number of things. The age range of these figures is 5 to 17.
5 to 17, so that's quite broad.
Yeah.
So it could be older children as well that weren't identified before.
Yeah, so the spike in age range when we look at the data is between 6 and 8. So again, there's a question for me about, actually, are we identifying and screening and diagnosing them earlier, or are they missing something in their early years? And then once they arrive at school,
it's becoming more prominent.
So we are looking at the data all the time, trying to make sense of what's happening and how best to respond to that. And part of this conversation with you is, I haven't got all the answers. You are the experts in your children, and I very much welcome working with you guys to find the answers to improving things. You know, we could do things better in this area. And I want to work with you to kind of work out how we do that. So all I've done there is shared with you my definition of a diagnosis, and it's essentially the identification of a disease or a label or an illness against an assessed set of symptoms.
They're being told they have a disease. It's actually a neurodiversity. I'm actually a neuroscientist, so we've changed the words illness and disease now. We use learning and behavioural differences.
Okay.
Because they are differences, subtle differences in the wiring of the brain, which result in ADHD and ASD.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm really keen to find out is why a diagnosis is so important to you as families, and more importantly, your children and young people. And that might seem a really obvious question to you because you're living with it every day. But I really want to sort of unpick what that label does for families, and most importantly, our children and young people. And leading on from that, what benefits of diagnosis are?
It's been incredibly helpful. Things have changed so much already.
Yeah.
My son just started in year 7 in September, and things just went to pieces completely. And that was what made us kind of look for help, and we had no idea. I think strong relationships in his primary school have kind of covered up for it.
Yeah.
But at secondary school, that's a luxury that you don't have.
Yeah.
Just so far, going through CAMS and having those conversations with the school, it's certainly not a paradise, but it's already been really helpful. I mean, before Christmas, I dreaded going home after work. It was awful, and I think my son was feeling terrible. Yeah. And now we have nice times for them. You know, there are still
teenagers
the usual things,
and difficult.
But just even the process without the diagnosis has made a big difference. And I've listened hard to what Eva has said, and no doubt other people have lots of stories to tell. The school has been reasonable, but I believe that when he has that diagnosis, I'm going to be able to push a lot more firmly and clearly. And the lady from CAMS said, you know, the school must treat it as if he has ADHD, and I believe that he will get that diagnosis. The other thing I would say is, if he doesn't get it, I don't know what we're going to do. I do not know what we're going to do. It's going to be, I'm going to be desperate. I'm going to be absolutely desperate, and I think he'll fall off the edge. He's very bright, and he won't get any qualifications. That's what I see. And do you know what? He sees it too. We came out of CAMS yesterday, and he said to me, my life might be over. He said, I'm going to be stacking supermarket shelves if this doesn't happen. And those were his words. And I felt awful for him. I said, look, the whole point of this process is to make sure that doesn't happen. But that's what it means.
Diagnosis isn't important if schools were able to treat every single child as an individual and accommodate needs and differences and all of those things. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in, and schools can't accommodate the different needs of different children, the different learning styles and all of those things that come, which therefore makes diagnosis critical. And you know, like other parents here, my child was regarded as a naughty boy. It was simple as that. He went to school, he was told he was the naughty boy, he was always on the cloud, and he believed he was a naughty boy, and it was only at the point of diagnosis that actually suddenly the school saw him differently, and they actually recognised him as a bright little boy that wasn't just naughty, that some of his behaviours in the classroom were actually not really his fault. They weren't intentionally, he wasn't intentionally causing chaos in the classroom. And that diagnosis absolutely changed it for him, that suddenly he wasn't, from a school perspective, just seen as naughty, but actually he was helped through some of it, and I think that that's where the diagnosis is critical.
So if I've heard that correctly, a diagnosis can change, your child's whole identity, both to the outside world, but also for them as well, in terms of, I'm not a naughty child, I'm a child with, my label. Okay.
And he understood it too, because he's, again, like many of the parents here, he's a bright child. So he equally understood, when I started saying to him, do you realise that it's not that you're naughty, that you actually sometimes can't help yourself, or whatever. But it also changed things for him. His self-esteem improved, because he definitely had self-esteem issues until then. And it's devastating when you see a child who's 6 or 7 already with low self-esteem.
My question is it's having a diagnosis is one thing, but I still think it's about professionals in the education system, the local authorities, in the health sectors, all have to learn to work together. Because I think when I do a lot of the support groups that I go to, even like the autism show at the weekend, you find a lot of parents that were coming to us, even from parents that were from Richmond, Kensington, all the way to Expelled, and they all said, we've got a child with a diagnosis, but we don't know what to do. So it's all right giving us the diagnosis, but we need follow-ups as well. And I think Senko teachers don't seem to want to accept the diagnosis, because what they usually say to my son now, obviously at 14, but he looks okay now. But that's only because I had to put him in a residential school, so when he comes home at weekends, he's happy, but what he says is, Mum, when I'm at school, they understand me as a person. So that's the difference. So it's about professionals, and even parents not saying to your child, there's nothing wrong with you, or the family and friends. So it's about everybody understanding that autistic or ADHD child or adult has a right to be respected, because sometimes people forget that they're still a person. So I would say my thing is, diagnosis is important, but it's the person who you tell doesn't turn around and say, well, they look normal. And that's a certain thing I think a lot of the autistic adults complain about, is that they're being disrespected when they get the diagnosis as well.
Without a diagnosis, you can't get medical treatment, which is very important and successful for a large number of children and for people that want to use it. I'm not saying that they shouldn't necessarily should. And also, although you don't actually need a diagnosis to have the protection of the Equality Act, it's very difficult to prove you're disabled within the meaning of the Equality Act and get reasonable adjustments, which are very necessary without a diagnosis. So it is possible, but it's much, much more difficult.
Even though children have the diagnosis, 67% of all special educational needs children are expelled from school, even though they only make up 17% of the school population, and over 50% of all children in secondary schools are also suspended. So I think we really need to address the whole concept of fixed and permanent exclusions within this group of children, because they are at such a higher risk of educational failure. And my son went to 9 schools, mainstream and private, and was rejected from all of them because of his chronic ADHD. So these children are systematically failed without the support network and infrastructure around them. And it's not just the school, it's a whole network of people they are to fulfill and reach their potential.
So what I'm hoping to achieve is that teachers can acknowledge that my son is not a bad kid, because that's very upsetting. Could you communicate to your teachers to stop punishing him for something which he's not, he's trying his best and he can't hold it together all day. Until we have a diagnosis, I can't communicate with the teachers.
That's rubbish, that is.
So I do know 2 things. So one is that they are looking at the teacher training curriculum, and then the second piece around sort of training for children and young people and teachers. So on the children and young people side, I think it does happen, but it's patchy and variable because it's an opt-in or opt-out thing for schools. So I think there are some schools that are very strong and inclusive others less so. And in terms of teacher training, we have commissioned some bespoke mental health training for Kingston schools, Kingston and Richmond schools. 50%, there was a 50% take up to go into the schools. So they had, so I'll keep it brief, they had 4 days of training, and then they've been offered mentoring alongside that, so they don't walk out the classroom and leave it all in the classroom, they apply it to the schools. So roughly 50% of schools have taken it up.
So that's de-escalation, sort of.
So it's about management. It's about saying, you know, these labels don't necessarily go away. They are part of that child and young person's life.
I feel like it needs to go more towards the early intervention, because we're constantly looking at de-escalation and what happens once it all goes awry. But no one's actually looking at how we're going to identify it and how we're going to put things in place so it doesn't get to that, so it doesn't disrupt the rest of the class.
So part of this training covered that in terms of training. Wishmore Academy Trust. So the first round of training has just finished, and we are starting the second round sort of towards the latter part of this year, so that we sort of make sure that the 50% that didn't take it up have the opportunity to do it.
Are they psychologists? Are they trained? Are they actually, you know, clinicians?
Yes,
psychiatrists?
Yeah. So the organisation and so the training is actually delivered by qualified clinical psychologists. They also went through a process with the schools. So I gave them my wish list and said, this is what I think the schools need. They then went to the schools and said, well, that's the wish list I've been given. Is that actually what you want from this training?
The school's discretion, isn't it?
So they rewrote a lot of the training to meet the specific needs of schools. So I've heard really positive
feedback. Ask parents what training they would like the schools to have. I realise you can't ask everybody all the time about everything, but it's just very interesting. In the company I work at, we do a lot of training for schools actually on mental health, both generally in specific instances. So I know there's they want to help. You don't go to teaching if you actively if you
and I am a firm believer, nobody comes to work to do a bad job. I know that's not your experience, and I hear that, and I'm not going to challenge that, but I have to hold on to, we all come to work to do
I would
a
love
good
to
job.
firmly believe that.
Yeah. Lots of questions about what we could do to make things different. So, you know, what did change for your child? Who helped you? Are there any gaps? You know, in hindsight of your own experiences, if we had X over here, that would have made a really big difference to you and your experience, or if we had Y over here, that would have. I think it comes back to your point about everybody working together. So, you know, I think teachers in a classroom full of 30, 15-year-olds can feel quite alone sometimes in terms of managing challenging behaviour.
And TAs are overstretched as well. I've had 4 one-to-ones.
When the school budgets are cut as well, they're cutting out staff. So these children that do need the early intervention aren't getting it because the school can't actually afford to put that in. So that's where it's right at that lower level. I've got older children that have gone through that, got a diagnosis, still misunderstood, still a massive stigma. My children ended up being very, very depressed. They believed that they were useless. They said to me, I don't need to do learning because I'm going to be dead before I need a job. So they ended up losing their whole self-esteem, thinking that they are this useless person. My son used to say, you know, why do they give you an hour detention for forgetting my protractor? I'm not going to remember it because of that punishment, he said, and he was panicking every single day to the point where I'm going to forget something, I'm going to make a mistake. And he was so panicked and anxious that it actually exacerbated his diagnosis to the point where I had to pull him out of school because there was just no, even with that diagnosis, there's just no budget. And everyone said to me on every single line, right from the doctor to the school to the Senko to everyone, they're all blaming lack of money. And I just feel that, well, in the long run, if you invest in these children when they're young, actually they will cost society less in the long run. They won't end up in prison. They won't end up in all of these situations that they find themselves in when they've lost the will to live. because actually they don't care. My son said, I'm not going to, Mum, but I feel like punching someone. The only way I'm going to get support at school is if I smash the class up. And that's what he was saying to me on a daily basis, and I was saying, no, I have brought you up to be better than that, just bite your tongue. And he was this time bomb, coming home going, Mum, I can't believe it, she did this, he did that, he did this. No one intervenes, no one helps, no one supports. And I just think the money side of it, if they haven't got it, how can they support our children if they haven't actually got the extra staff in order to do it?
And if you can get this group of children, this neurodiverse group of children, emotional regulation and social communication to a functional level, where they're able to communicate effectively and self-regulate their emotions, then you don't need a lot of the additional support, but that requires a good training, but actually then less provision afterwards. So I mean, it seems to me that's because those are the things that the people that are supporting them are often really struggling with, and the other children around them are affected by. And so I mean, I think that I've done the training, and it's a phenomenal program. That actually, if everybody understood it, then you wouldn't need everyone to have a teaching assistant.
And there's something around banishing the stigma in the classroom. And that can come through awareness raising, this sort of campaign, I know you're going to bash me for using this word, but I'm going to say it because it's very normalising, difference.
But it's very much a disability, and that's what people are trying to. Yes, we want it normalised because actually the whole population is somewhere on that spectrum somewhere. It's just who needs a little bit. At the end of the day, every single child needs that individual support. So it's actually giving the school more staff, less numbers. We haven't changed the education systems in 100 years. And that's where we need to start thinking that system doesn't work for our neurodiverse society. It just doesn't.
A lot of teachers aren't willing to believe that a child that has been seen as a problem can be really good at something. So then when the child does find something that they want to be good at and want to focus on, they'll, no, you're not going to be able to do that. And they're not encouraged to find something to shine at. Because they are basically, their self-esteem is rubbish anyway. They need so much more confidence boosting than your average child. My son is very, very athletic, but he doesn't have the confidence to push himself forward. So he's never joined the athletics club at school, even the running club, because he would need someone to come and say, look, you're obviously really good, I'd really like you to come along to athletics club, because I think you could be really good here.
I've found it a really painful experience because nobody's been able to support me through this whole process, and I actually believe that this, when you describe the pre-0 to 5 and the post, things hadn't married up. Things hadn't married up at all, knowing that they had a dependency on opiates, and that should actually have been said that we know that as a doctor you should now be following A, B, D and F. On that basis we believe that this is what you should be doing, this is where you should be going. But there isn't almost and you're leaving parents to flounder before it actually then comes about. And I do feel that we need to be setting precedents and saying, let's have it in such a way that there is a basket of things that can be done, but we need to be sharing this and be open. And I don't feel that there's this openness from this environment.
Are these questions being asked to us so that we can understand the context properly? Because there is some suggestion that we have to control this very high rate of diagnosis and reduce it if possible, because it's a gateway to spending money.
So the short answer is no, and I will explain that on a number of levels. So we can't take the diagnosis away because it's in all of the diagnostic tools.
That's what I was thinking.
So in the UK we have two main diagnostic tools. ADHD and ASD are in both. So it is a clinically valid diagnosis. There's no intention of taking that away.
Not taking it away, but making it harder to access the diagnosis.
No changes to what we've currently got. These conversations are about, is there an opportunity to do something better? So as we come through these conversations, if we get to a conclusion that says, what we've got works now that we've unpicked it and we've played around with it and we've redrawn it, actually what we've got works, then there won't be a change. If through the conversations we begin to identify things that we can do differently and it's going to make it better, let's make a change. But the 2 promises I will give you is that any changes are identified with you and from you and you support, and no change will be made without that dialogue and consultation with you.